Paul from Trending Who, What, Where, and When. Today, I will be speaking with Melissa A. Priblo Chapman about her book, Distant Skies. Melissa will be joining us from Binghamton, New York, USA.
Hi, my name's Melissa Priblo Chapman, and I'm speaking to you from the southern tier of New York State, outside Binghamton. This is my horse Starbuck, and we're here to tell you about Distant Skies, an American journey on horseback. This is a book about adventure of a young girl. It's a true story, and Starbuck's here because this book has a great horse in it that you will meet, a wonderful dog, and a funny little mule. And it's about our travels and adventures on a solo trip across the United States. I hope you'll give Distant Skies, an American journey on horseback, a look. It's available wherever books are sold.
Start off by asking where you take friends and company when they come to visit you in Binghamton, New York.
Binghamton is right near the Pennsylvania border, but our particular, so we have a lot of really scenic like back roads and so on. When it's fall, especially because it's very hilly and very wooded, I always hear about people going farther up into New England, and I always think, boy, there's so many pretty drives around here. But Broome County is famous for its handmade, hand-carved carousels. There's, I think it was 6 or 7 of them just in our county. They were donated years ago by George Johnson. And so a lot of people come to see them, and you can get a little stamp if you've ridden each one, but they're beautiful, very unique. They're not like the modern factory made ones. So that's our big draw here.
Is it mostly agricultural there?
Not anymore. Most of the bigger farms are gone. There's a few of them around, like where I get my hay for my guys, but it was a very industrial area. It was considered the home of IBM.
Oh, really?
So
Oh.
yeah, Endicott, New York, which is the next town over, is the home of IBM, and also Singer Link, which is the flight simulators and so on. So right up through the 80s was very huge with industry, and that's where most people worked. But as you know, things like that have changed and been outsourced and suffered for a while. But then we also have a big university, Binghamton University. And I don't know what division is, but they've grown themselves quite a year. And it almost seems like that's almost the industry now, where a lot of people work and they have sports teams and so on. So that's a big part of our community also.
Looking at your pictures, they're beautiful. It almost looks like it'd be a really good area for tourists to go and relax.
I think it's beautiful. Like, I think I sent one, and it's just again, that's the farm where I get hay, but the colors are so vivid. And I think that's why I mentioned 4 distinct seasons are nice, because, you know, the sky is blue and the green is green, and there's just wildflowers. And if you're a person that likes driving trips and back roads and stuff, I would definitely tell someone to look at the northeast corner of PA and the southern tier of upstate New York.
So tell us about your background and the steps leading up to your Distant Skies experience.
Well, my background really was about horses. I was, like many other kids are, I was quite obsessed with horses. But I think it went a little deeper with me. I never outgrew it, never wanted to do anything else except be around horses and be outdoors. And it just sort of, the trip that is the heart of the book, Distant Skies, started really as just kind of a daydream. You know, I'd be a little kid and you'd be looking out the window or something and just picture these little back roads and trails. And I always wanted to know where they went, but I didn't want to do it hiking or in a car. It was always in my fantasy on horseback. So, as I got older, I was able to get my own horse in my teens. And then I got Rainey, and it just never went out of my head. Later on, someone that I met on the trip said, "You had a call," and they usually refer to religious meaning when they say someone had a call. But he said, no, I think it's anytime you're really driven to do something, even if it's unusual, just something in you. And that's how that started.
Okay. Well, tell us more about the book, Distant Skies.
Well, Distant Skies is funny because I always considered it an adventure story. And when I worked on writing, I had a little bit of background as a freelance writer, and many years had gone by since my trip. And I started to just think, well, it's probably too long ago. And I worked on other things, but the stories from that time, I do a lot of public speaking and speak to groups. And it just seemed like people really responded to the stories and asked about it and remembered them. So I kept working on writing the book since then. Just kind of worked away at it. I chose trust because a lot of people think that horses are, if they're not horse people, it seems like something almost like a sport or a hobby that you can hop on and ride like a motorcycle or going skiing or something. And when you get on 1,000-pound animal, and you really need to have this sort of communication and trust between you. And this is farther along in our trip. Hope it's not a spoiler, because the trip is about going cross country, and this takes place outside Arizona. And it's how we got ourselves in kind of a jam on a trail. When we set out in the morning, in this here and now, I had the woods again. After months on the plains and the desert plateaus, I felt welcomed into the arms of trees. I rode on trails through sweet-smelling pines and stands of aspens with gold leaves flickering in the wind like a million candle flames. The air was cool in a way that was both invigorating and familiar. Rainey seemed to feel it too. Both he and Amanda walked with spirit in their steps. And I should say Rainey is my horse and Amanda is my little pack mule. And Gypsy in this story is the dog that accompanied us. But anyway, both he and Amanda walked with spirit in the steps. The time of rest had been good for them, and the forest paths were easy on their feet and legs after the paved roads we'd traveled. The view changed as we rode, and vistas opened up when there was a break in the trees. We seemed to be ever climbing. The view was gorgeous, but it startled me to see how high up the trail had led us. The land sloped steeply down to the south on my left, with meadows of yellow grass, and beyond that, more evergreen forest, and it sloped up on my right. I was not particularly comfortable with heights, so I tried to focus instead on the trail in front of us. We moved forward, climbing more. Gypsy, my dog, who had been in the saddle with me, suddenly wanted to get down. Once on the ground, she did none of her usual sniffing and exploring. Instead, she placed herself in the back of our little line, following Amanda. The trail narrowed even further, and Amanda shifted away from her usual position, which is slightly alongside Rainey, and stepped directly behind him. We were now all in one straight line, Rainey in front carrying me, then Amanda, then Gypsy. And that's a good thing, because the trail had become so narrow, there was no other way we'd fit. I no longer looked at the view or admired the surroundings. I was well past my comfort level. Rainey seemed focused on keeping his head level and picking his way carefully along the path. We were no longer climbing, but the trail had shrunk to a width that I was well aware we should not be on. It was a thin, worn line where you had to place one foot carefully in front of the other and hug the uphill side to keep from slipping. What if the trail narrowed and ended? We couldn't turn around, and I couldn't imagine all four of us backing down what we had just come up. It was so steep on the side of the mountain that now the drop was practically vertical. I forced myself to take a peek, and a swoop of nausea overcame me. I was scared, but I didn't want to stop Rainey because I was afraid to break his concentration or cause him to look down or step wrong. If one of us went down the mountainside, we were all going, and it would be a long fall. I began to tremble, and I willed it to stop so Rainey wouldn't sense my fear, but I had no control over it. I could feel through the rope in my hand that Amanda was studiously keeping Rainey's exact pace. I didn't turn around and look at her or Gypsy because I didn't want to do anything that might shift our balance, even one iota. I focused on a spot on Rainey's neck. I looked at the way his black mane fell to one side and moved in the breeze. I watched the glide of his shoulder with each step he took, but my eyes shifted. I couldn't help it, and I looked down again. That was it for me. Rainey, my wonderful horse, he did not seem to be scared or hesitant, though. He wanted to keep going. So I leaned forward and slowly let the reins become a loose drape. Riders are taught that it's important to be the leader and be in charge with a horse. We're supposed to be in charge at all times. But here I closed my eyes and put us all in Rainey's care. Every ounce of trust and faith I had, I put in Rainey. He never faltered. He kept up his steady walk, placing each sturdy black hoof in the right place, one step at a time. After what felt like hours, but could have been minutes, the trail began to widen. We kept moving forward slowly. Gradually, we descended from the views and the cliff and my fears until Rainey safely brought us all to a dirt road through the pines.
Wow, that's a great passage.
There were many moments on that journey where I asked myself, what are you doing here? Why are, like, how did you end up here?
At what point did you decide that you would go on this cross-country journey? Because when I'm reading the book, I kept thinking, when did you just decide, I'm just doing this and going forward?
You know what had happened? I was at that, I always think it's a funny age where you're around early 20s and a lot of people are sort of deciding what they're doing with the rest of their life, settling down and getting married or getting into a career or that type of thing. And I just felt unsettled. I didn't, none of that appealed to, or felt like where I should be. And this dream that I had of riding cross country just felt like it was just, I couldn't get it out of my mind. And then, you know, I was working and so on, and I met so many people that weren't doing what they wanted to do. You know, I worked in a manufacturing situation at that time, and people were miserable, but they'd been there for 30 years or something. And it sort of, I was young, but I sort of learned the wise lesson to at least try. And that's how I started to look at it, to just at least give it a try. And later, now that I'm older, I also realize I think everybody finds their way of growing up, sort of, whether it's going to college and that's your first time away and you 4 years later you're kind of a different person, or you know, different things. And now that I'm older, I think this was just a way that I chose to sort of bridge that time from being young and into being an adult. And it was an unusual way to do it, but it worked for me. So I just kind of had that nagging, like, are you going to just keep talking about it and thinking about it, or give it a try? And so then I started to actually, you know, work on learning about conditioning the horse and that type of thing.
And did a lot of preparation before you left. It sounds like you did a lot of preparation.
There is, because I was nervous. You know, there have been other riders that have ridden farther and longer and all that type of thing, but a lot of times they have a support team or they switch horses or so on. And this was like, I loved this horse. I still do. And I felt like I had a responsibility to do it right. You know what I mean? I didn't want to just like take off and not think about it. And even with all that planning, the beginning really was really rough and almost a disaster. There were so many things I didn't think of. It's like anything else. You can read books, you can talk to people, you can practice, but like anything, there's nothing like going out and doing something, you know? So the beginning few weeks were quite an adjustment, but we did keep going.
That would be before cell phones, before GPS.
That is the biggest difference now. Like, people ask me about that. I've heard from a few people over the years that have done similar type trips. And there was one woman that wanted to try it. And she, you know, this was probably 10 years ago. And she asked questions and so on. And she set out, did a sort of a different kind of thing, but she sent me a postcard and she said, I'm only, you know, 37 miles or something from the Indiana border. And I remember thinking, how does she know? And then I thought, well, oh, of course, it's not like it was when I went, because of GPS tells you what's ahead, TripAdvisor, Google Earth, you know, there's so many ways. And I think that's why it's kind of neat. For a while, I thought my story's too old. I'm just going to get it written down, but it'll be for my kids and my family someday. But it sort of almost took this neat retro turn to remind people that really just a few years ago, that stuff was all unheard of. And I don't know if you remember, I think you told me you're in the process of reading the book, but the first state where I am is near Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is a pretty long state if you go from the northeast corner to the southwest corner, which I did. So it took me almost like the first 4 weeks or almost 4 weeks where, and we were just learning to adjust and so on. But when I crossed that first state line, it said, welcome to West Virginia, that little narrow panhandle up near Wheeling. And it was a rainy day and we just had come around a curve and it was a lot of trees. And when I saw that sign, it was such a moment, because you didn't know it was there. Like I always knew vaguely where we were, and I knew I was in Western Pennsylvania heading for the state line. But when you just see that, it's such an exciting moment, because you can't plan it like you can now, and you can't know ahead of time. And it was just kind of a special moment because it was our first state line really out of Pennsylvania. So that was a different way of travel. The bright side of people doing adventures now is that it's probably safer because people can know where you are and you can reach people. But back then, solitary travel was very solitary, different than now.
And it was slow too. It seemed like you averaged about 20 miles per day on an average.
I think we did between 20 and 25. Like to this day, that trip has developed in me a really good sense of direction and distance. Like I found out the hard way on that trip that a lot of people don't have that, because we're so used to just letting our car take it, and somebody would recommend a place where I could get water or a place to stay, and they'd say, oh, it's just a mile or two up the road,
Yeah.
and I'd be like 8 miles later before I get. So I did develop kind of a sense of that. So I think in certain parts of the country we did more than that. But when I figured everything out, I think we were around 25. There were a few hard days where I learned later that I pushed it past 30. And there were a few days, with different terrain or bad weather that we just didn't make good miles at all. But 20 to 25 is definitely the average.
While reading, I kept doing the math, trying to think, so how long is this going to take now to get to the end? Because driving, it's so different than driving or flying.
When you put yourself out there that way, I used that term out there, like whatever was going on where we were in it. Like I just carried a little 2-person mountain climbing tent because it was light and small and compact. So whatever happened, the temperature, the weather, the terrain, the traffic, like we were just out there in it, and you get really sort of, everything else sort of falls away. Like you get down to this basic surviving as long as you're safe and you find water and you have food. Those are the 3 things that matter. And then once you have that, it sort of opens you up to your surroundings, because you're not listening to the car radio or someone talking. And there were many parts in that book, and I hate to sound corny, but I felt so connected to what was around us, like every little thing. It's a very special feeling to have in the outdoors.
Well, it came through the book too.
Well, thank you.
So how did you connect with Trafalgar Square Books?
I've always wanted to write, but it seemed like the horse trip, sort of a fantasy, like you don't just get to be a writer because you want to be. But I did start in the 90s doing some freelance work, and I was encouraged by that. Had never written the book yet. I was encouraged by that magazine and so on. I was having good luck submitting things. So in about 2005 or 6, I was introduced to someone that was a publisher, and my friend said, oh, tell her about your story. And I was kind of like, oh, it was a long time ago, thinking that it's too old to be other people to think it was interesting. And she was very interested in it. And she said, no, I think you should work on that, because there's a whole generation of kids alive now that wouldn't go down a block away without posting about it or looking up the directions or something, and it's not that long ago. It's still the modern world. Like I had a little transistor radio, and I listened to music on there that is still out, like Bruce Springsteen and George Strait and stuff like that, so it wasn't ancient history, but it is a different world to the generation and to what people are used to now. So she said, I think it's actually neat that it's longer ago. So I had been writing down the stories and everything, but it was very casual. So I began to, learn about book writing and all that. And I think you'd asked me earlier about, I said, when you asked about writing the book. And when I finally finished it, it was way longer, because when you're out there like that, that's what I started to say earlier. Every road is a story. Every time a car stops and someone talks to you and tells you their story, every different farm you're at, every wild animal you get to see. So I had written down everything. So it was really, really long. And then, the next part was learning what publishers were looking for, how to do proposals, which are almost like business writing. It's a whole different type of writing. So it was a long process for me, because I was not schooled, professionally in that. But I had researched publishers, that did that type of book, and their specialty is all equine related. So I gave them a try, and this is the result.
Yeah, I saw that specialized in that. That probably would be helpful.
Oh yeah, yeah. I had tried a few, had a little interest. There was like one that was like an outdoor publisher and one that was interested, but they were taking kind of a long time to commit. And when I heard from Trafalgar, they were just so nice to work with right off the bat. And they seemed to really understand the bond with Rainey, the horse. And that was a big deal to me because that was a big part of the trip.
So tell us about the origin of the name of your book, Distant Skies.
Well, Distant Skies comes from a poem that was written for me by someone I met on the trip. I'm not sure how far along in the book you are, but you'll meet that and see that explanation at the end. But so it is from a poem that was written by someone I met on the trip. But it also, it was always in my head to call the book that, because that feeling of going west, and especially from the Midwest on, you just have the wide open space in front of you and the sky is sort of always ahead of you. So it fit in kind of a literal way and in sort of a, not literal way too, but it is from a poem.
I was amazed by all the horse lovers who assisted you in your cross-country journey. Please share with us some of your experiences that you had with them.
I feel that that's maybe one of the most important parts of my story. Like, it is about me and my animals and our adventures, but there wouldn't be a book if it weren't for the kindness of strangers. And my parents, as you can imagine, were very worried when it really looked like I was going to actually do this journey. And I kept telling them I did not grow up in a horsey or farm family. I sort of, had to make that happen myself. And my parents were really skeptical. I was like, no, everyone will, if we need help, people will help us and that type of thing. And I did believe that, but even I had no idea of the extent of how that would play out. And it started in the very, very beginning. From day one, the first day was a disaster and I didn't get where I was supposed to get. And right off the bat, on the first day, I'm probably 15 miles from my home and I had to depend on strangers for help. And, we were just met with nothing but kindness. And I think that there's something about that journey and that trip that people felt inside. First of all, I was a young girl and I was, sometimes homesick or scared or lonesome or so on. And people sensed that vulnerability in me. They were not threatened by me. And so there was that, but also there was a thing where people wanted to be a part of it. They just felt like, I heard from so many people, oh, I always wanted to do something like that, but, and then there'd be a reason why they couldn't or didn't. But if they helped us, it was almost like a little part of them came along. And over the many miles of our journey, I had so many people give me their good luck charms and holy medals and things like that. I had to send some stuff home, but I think that was sort of symbolic to me of a part of them was a part of this journey. And people like horses most time, even if you're not a horse people, you never hear people like to see a horse. And Rainey was very friendly and good around people. Gypsy the same way. If you're not a dog person, she was well behaved and gentle and everything. So there was just something about that people liked being part of it and liked helping us. And I'll never get over how much that was a part of our trip. It seemed like every time we needed help the most, someone came along, and that still amazes me to this day.
It does seem like a really friendly and generous group.
Yeah. I just want to add as a note too, I told you I speak to some people that have done similar journeys. And I hear this a lot now that the book's out, where people say, well, that was back then, you could never expect that now. But you know what? There's a woman from this area I mentioned earlier that did a similar thing. Her name's Debbie Vorsky, and she it was a different trip, but she had the exact same kind of experience. That was in the 2000s. And even I did an interview with one of our local news, and the man that was doing the interview said he bought a motorcycle when he was that same age, 22 or 23, had it just a couple weeks, very inexperienced, and he took off on a cross-country ride. And in Colorado, he fell and flipped his bike over and got a little bit hurt. And he said, I was kind of laying there cowboy comes along in his pickup. They lifted the motorcycle in the back. He took him home and his wife fed him and so on. And this is a guy. So it's not even like, oh, it's because you're female or it was a long time ago. When I think it tells us that we know there's bad people out there. It would be naive to think there isn't. You have to hope you don't cross paths with them, and you have to also be smart about choices you make. But other than that, I think most people, when they see someone that needs help, they respond to that. I think that's an American thing, and I think it's humans in general, and it gives me faith. And I raised my kids mostly in the 90s and the early 2000s. I have four children that are all in their 20s now. And, that was the, explosion of the internet and stranger danger. And, we'd hear if a kid was missing 3,000 miles away, we'd hear about it. We didn't always used to. And it was hard because there was a big thing where they were always teaching kids not to talk to strangers and that type of thing. And it was really difficult for me because, of course, you want to keep your kids safe, but talking to strangers can be fun and rewarding. So you have to learn with kids how to, certainly in my life, it has been how to balance that, but I still believe most people are good.
So you think a young person could make the same journey today?
Well, I absolutely do, because I hear from people that try similar things. Like I said, there's differences now because of technology, but the general feeling of just wanting to be out there and do something different and all that is it still happens. So there's a young man that in the 2000s, he went all over the country. There's several long riders like that, but then there's always, you see on the news a young person that sailed across the ocean or did a solo flight, and broke a record or something. I think there will always be people adventuring, and the main change is technology.
Actually, I'm amazed. I saw a couple books of people that walked across the country.
Yes, there are a couple good ones about that subject too. And I can certainly see the appeal of that, because to me, it's being like right out there. You know what I mean? I get the fun of an RV or a camper or whatever, but to me, if I couldn't ride a horse, I would walk, because you just are more connected to everything that's around you. So I get the appeal of that. I really do. And they say things like the Appalachian Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, like the famous long hikes. They say now that it's almost, there's areas that it's like being on a city street, that there's so many people doing that type of thing now, But I think our last year, 2020, and the few months of this year have brought people outdoors a lot more too. And that's a good thing, that part of it.
You received a great deal of press coverage during your cross-country trip.
Well, press coverage was interesting because, nowadays there's people that make their living off like blogging and being influencers and stuff. And that's always sort of weirdly fascinating that can happen now, because back then, if you did something unusual, it drew the press. And also, as you can imagine, I tried to avoid bigger cities and highways. This was very much a back road, small town kind of journey. And, for something unusual to happen, you make the front page on these small town newspapers, So the first time that someone wanted to come out and do a story was just, a day or two into the trip. And I was really hesitant. I said, well, I don't know if we should be in the news. I don't want to attract unsavory people. I've spoken that I believe most people are good, but you have to be smart. And the reporter told me, well, this is a weekly newspaper, so you'll be out of this area by the time this comes out. And I said, all right. And you know what? It was funny because that started it. And then every little town we went through, and sometimes we were near bigger cities. Like I said, I had to cross the river near Wheeling. We were near Albuquerque, Wichita. Sometimes we were near some bigger cities. And every time the news put us on the news on TV or newspapers, it ended up helping us, because first of all, it gave us credibility. Like people would see me, excuse me, and the animals, and they'd be like, oh, I saw her on the news. Yeah. Let's see if she needs anything, And then there was groups like 4-H, which you're probably familiar with that. They're children involved with various aspects of agriculture and so on. And there's a big horse presence in 4-H. And sometimes the group leaders would bring them out to meet me, and they'd make me things and bring feed for the horse and so on. So I think it gave me a little credibility. And instead of having to worry about bad people seeing us, it actually exposed me to good people that wanted to come and find us and help us. So I didn't foresee that, but it ended up working out well. And a couple of times I learned that if you don't talk to reporters, that they still put you on TV anyway. When I was near Albuquerque, a couple cars, when we were near a busier road, they were saying, "Oh, I saw you on the news." And I said, "I haven't been on the news in this, in a week or so, or this area or something." They said, "Yeah, you were on in Albuquerque." And then I remembered I'd seen a car going by with a camera out, like, remember those old big video cameras? They weighed like 500 pounds or something. And I saw that going by, and then they had taken quotes and so on from a newspaper reporter I talked to farther back down the road or something. So I thought, well, that's kind of annoying. If you're going to put me on there, at least let me answer, that type of thing. So I learned it was worthwhile to talk to reporters. And then it was kind of fun too. It broke up the day and that type of thing. That's right now still in kind of a daydream status. When Rainey was still alive and still fairly young, I did a couple, smaller trips in this area just because I wanted to, with no specific reason. But I don't know, like, I don't think that ever goes away and goes out of you. I still spend a great deal of time outdoors and riding, and I do travel back roads and so on, but not on horseback. So I'll say probably not, because I felt blessed and that was a special thing, how it all worked out. But I can never 100% say, oh no, I would never, because it does sort of stay in your mind. And especially now, like, I'm on the other end of raising kids, like my kids are all in their 20s and doing well out in the world. And you start to go, well, maybe I'm not needed as much, at home or that type of thing. So I'd never say never. I think that's how I'd answer that.
You maybe could sneak away for a month or two.
You never know.
What do you want your readers to take away from this book?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked me that. It's funny because when they had set a date for the book to be released, and that was before we knew what 2020 was going to be like. So we kind of delayed and we waited. And then finally, this isn't the only book this publisher does. They had other books, to do and so on. So it came out in the fall of last year. And originally I thought, oh no, you can't do book signings or have a party or anything, but then it's kind of neat the way it all worked out that way, because one of the most rewarding things for anyone that has writing out in the world is to hear back from people in a positive way. And that has meant so much to me, people that have contacted me. And the theme seems to have been, this book is what I needed this year. Like, people were stuck at home, or they were so discouraged. There was like a volatile political landscape that we were in, and the COVID. And it was just a time where people like, this just sort of took me away, and it was upbeat, and it reminded me of the good parts of our country. And that just meant so much to me. I had one woman that had very serious health situation and was bedridden. And she said, I saved that book and read a little bit every night because it just put me out there with you guys, and it just made me feel good to read it. And like, I could get choked up talking about getting messages like that, people reaching out and saying that. And I've had people tell me that they were struggling with, quarantine and not seeing people. And they said, I had a few people say, this book reminded me that solitude doesn't have to be a bad thing, to go outdoors and enjoy your animals and things like that. And so to me, I wouldn't have, if you'd asked me that question a few years ago, I might have had a different answer. But to me, now I feel like that's the purpose of this book. That's on a large scale level, that it has meant something to people and motivated people and inspired people. Couldn't ask for anything more. On a personal level, these animals from this journey and some of the people that you meet in the book are no longer with us. And it's just neat to hear people talking about them, and it keeps them kind of alive for me too. So how many people get to revisit the best part of their youth, later on? So it's been just a wonderful, positive experience having this book out.
You've been a paid speaker to over 100 organizations. Could you tell us what those experiences were like?
Yes, that was an interesting part of the journey. When I first came back, as you mentioned earlier, especially locally in my hometown, it was in the news and on TV and so on, that we had completed the journey successfully. And when I first came back, a group I believe it was the Historical Society in our county, asked if I would come and talk and if I had slides and so on. I didn't have slides, but I had some pictures, so I had them made into slides. And I went and talked to them. And as you can probably tell, the subject is very dear to my heart. I think you can tell how much it means to me. And I think people just responded to that and felt what I felt. And so it was 100% word of mouth. I've never to this day advertised or had cards printed or anything. But someone from that group asked if I'd speak to their church group, and someone from that asked if I'd come to their Boy Scout meeting, and it just blossomed from there. And the neat side effect of that was eventually I started to learn. At first I was doing it for free, eventually learned that speakers get paid sometimes. And I'll still do like school kids and stuff for free, but back then I was starting to get paid for that. And it didn't feel right to just pay bills or go shopping or something, because I felt like the animals earned it more than I did. So I saved and saved. And at the time I was boarding my horses. I had Rainey and Manda and my older horse Bo, and you can imagine that was very expensive. So I saved enough to put a down payment on the land. And so I bought almost 10 acres and fenced it and put up a little lean-to barn those first few years. Eventually I met my husband, and that's where we live. That's where I'm sitting right now. So I feel like the speaking, the interest from people and the animals sort of helped build the life that I still have now. So that was the offshoot of speaking to groups a lot.
So speaking has been good for you.
Yep, I enjoy it. I enjoy meeting the people. And I hear they always have stories too. There's always somebody that, tells me they had a grandparent that, rode from here to there or something. And I love hearing other people's stories too. So that's been a very positive thing also.
You think we'll see Distant Skies as a movie or a Netflix series?
Oh, that would be lovely. I would sure enjoy that. And I do get asked about that. So far I've heard whisperings. I've heard a little reach out from a scout that says they look at all kinds of media, podcasts and books and articles to, kind of sell to movies. I've heard from them. And I know that I heard from an actress in Hollywood, and I have heard that she gave the book to someone out there that works with Disney, but so far those are all third hand kind of things. There's nothing official in the works. I'm biased, of course, but I think it would make a neat movie or series because it's picturesque. You know what I mean? Like Rainey's a beautiful buckskin horse, and it's full of natural scenery and wide open spaces and colorful people, so I personally think it would be a great movie, but we'll see. We'll see.
Are you working on any upcoming books?
I am. I'm working on a children's book that also involves horses, and that's a true story about a horse story in Montana. And then I'm also working on my very first attempt at fiction, which I've never written. When I mentioned doing freelance work and so on, it wasn't all about the horse trip, but it was all nonfiction, horse and dog related, that type of thing. So this is my first attempt at fiction, and it's a mystery. So those are the two things I've got going on right now.
When do you think those will be available?
It's hard to tell. The children's book is pretty close to me sending it out there. So I'm fingers crossed on that. The other one is still a work in progress, but I hope to not take as long as I did to write Distant Skies.
You have experience now.
Yeah, that's true. Yep. And my kids are grown. That makes a big difference.
Do you have any advice for new writers?
The best advice that I could think of is to learn as much as you can and read as much as you can. Because I'm a pretty voracious reader. I like a lot of different types of books, magazines, that type of thing. And you start to develop just by reading the type of writing that you like or don't like, or that sounds like good quality writing or doesn't. And even though you're not doing it, it sort of gives you that background. And if you feel that, because there were times with the book that I was very discouraged and thought, why am I working on this? That book was, or that trip was, 25 years ago or 30 years ago. Who would be interested in this? But there was something in me that just kept going, no, don't give up, and my family was supportive and my friends were too. They're like, no, you keep writing those stories, and I think um, getting through the discouraging times by listening to your own gut instincts, but also being open to learning like what sells and what publishers are looking for. Like I said, my first draft was literally more than twice the size. If it was a book, it would be this thick. And as much as it was hard for me to part with those stories, I understand that from a marketing standpoint, a publisher doesn't want to risk that type of volume on an unknown author. And sometimes people will walk by a book if it looks intimidating and not pick it up. So, you have to learn to stick with your gut, but also compromise as you learn about that industry too. But the bottom line is to just write all the time, even if you look back on it and you don't like your writing and it still gives you something to work on. But that perseverance of just not giving up, that's the best part, or the strongest advice, I would say. Well, I just hope that people will pick up the book and give it a try. I think the first round of feedback I got was horse people, because it is an equine publisher and that's where we marketed. But it's starting to spread out to people. You don't have to be a horse person or an outdoorsy person or anything, because this book is about humans and emotions. It's about taking a chance and being in touch with and connected with the rest of the world and our environment and so on. So I hope that people will find that sort of hopefulness in this book too.
You had a high ranking in Amazon also. I think that would help people find you.
I hope so. Yeah. The publisher was able to, they learned in the spring, I think it was April, they got one of those Kindle deals, and they have to apply for those. And I guess that's a big coup because it introduces the book to new eyes, and new people. And that helped a lot. That helped. But what's funny is, as you know, if you're reading the book, word of mouth is a big thing in the journey. Like people were like, I just feel funny letting you just write off and not knowing I'm going to call my buddy down the road, in the next town. And I feel like the book, it's almost the same thing happening with the book. Like I'm starting to hear like on Facebook and different things where people say, I'm in Colorado, but so-and-so told me. And so it's just kind of neat how even in the modern day that word of mouth is a big deal too. So Kindle deals and marketing and all that is great, but word of mouth is still good too.